If we do not step up, not only will we not reach our goal of lowering emissions, but the Pennsylvania of 2050 will be generating 1.4% more emissions than in 2005. That's a lot of heat waves and a lot more flooding. We have a considerable challenge ahead of us, but there are a number of tools at hand that can quickly boost our progress. First, we can join 11 other Northeast states in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. This will cut greenhouse gas emissions from power plants from between 97 and 227 million tons by 2030. We can also require commercial buildings to meet higher energy efficiency codes. We can get more electric vehicles on the road by expanding charging infrastructure and making more models available statewide. We can raise the alternative energy portfolio standards to require electricity generators to get more of their energy from clean, renewable sources. And we can increase the current energy savings requirement for electric distribution companies and create new similar requirements for gas utilities. There are many other ways to act now to reduce emissions. This climate action plan is a framework of both vision and on-the-ground realities that shows how. But we also need to talk about how we adapt to climate change impacts we're already experiencing. Here are some of the greatest risks we face from climate change. The health and safety of all Pennsylvanians, and especially Pennsylvanians who live in environmental justice areas, will be at significant risk from heat waves and flooding. Infrastructure is at greatest risk from flooding and landslides. Farmers are at significant risk from an overall warmer, wetter climate, including flooding. And our recreation and tourism industries, as well as our forests, ecosystems, and wildlife, are at greatest risk from the steady rise in statewide average temperature. This covers a lot of areas of our lives. The Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan 2021 charts an adaptation pathway for each of these areas. My cabinet colleagues will talk further about the challenges they're seeing, actions needed, and efforts underway in infrastructure, agriculture, and natural resources. And I'd like to highlight some of the actions that are needed in our environmental justice areas. As Allison Acevedo will tell you in a moment, many environmental justice communities have already experienced decades of disinvestment and now also face disproportionate risk from climate change. We need to start now to identify opportunities to meaningfully engage and partner with community-based organizations and residents. Opportunities for community capacity building can be identified and then invested in. For example, grants can be created for resilience projects, such as flood-protected community centers with green roofs. When climate risks are integrated into local planning, support for vulnerable residents needs to be included. We need to incorporate informal heat wave coping practices into our emergency planning. Climate change adaptation strategies such as these must be evaluated in terms of the triple bottom line, with economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits all considered. The cost of inaction may be severe, and the benefits of any action may be sizable, as small investments can prevent difficult situations from becoming dire. I want to thank the Energy Program Office here at DEP, our Policy Office, our Environmental Justice Office, as well as our partners, ICF Consulting, Penn State University, and Hamel Environmental Consulting, for developing this plan for statewide climate action. I urge leaders in our legislature, our state and local governments, our many business sectors, agriculture, academia, and community and environmental organizations to read the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan 2021 and see how they fit in and take action now. Thank you, and I'm pleased to turn it over to Allison Acevedo, the Director of our Office of Environmental Justice. Al?
Thank you so much, Secretary McDonald. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Acevedo, and I'm the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice at DEP. I'm excited to be here today with Secretary McDonald, Secretary Gramian, Secretary Redding, and Secretary Adams-Dunn to unveil Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan 2021 and also, importantly, reinforce the urgency of action around climate change. As Secretary McDonald explained, it's vitally important that we pursue climate action in communities that are particularly susceptible to impacts of climate change. So these are often communities, these susceptible communities are often disproportionately impacted, and they're often communities of color and low-income areas. Having already experienced decades of disinvestment, Pennsylvanians in these communities contend with daily ongoing challenges that are and will continue to be worsened by climate change impacts. Residents in vulnerable communities are often in older housing infrastructure situations and have limited access to air conditioning and have limited mobility around moving to other locations, as heat waves bring more and sequential days of 90 and even 95-degree temperatures. People can experience temperatures in as much as 10 degrees or even 20 degrees higher if living in neighborhoods that are heat islands, that have little canopy often and little green space. Increased heat, as well as rainfall and flooding, which are climate situations, exacerbate pre-existing health conditions and further challenge the well-being of residents in communities that have faced continuous environmental and climate challenges. In creating Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan 2021, DEP and our Office of Environmental Justice really listened to views expressed by partners, particularly in environmental justice communities. We held outreach meetings and engagement sessions with groups across Pennsylvania to gather feedback on the 2018 Climate Action Plan, really inform feedback and work with and particularly work with organizations, nonprofit organizations and other partners, including the Environmental Advisory Council in Harrisburg, where we worked with that organization to plan a climate town hall. So this 2021 climate plan really incorporates and addresses so many of the issues that were raised at these engagement sessions. This plan was able to take the feedback and offer meaningful suggestions and solutions around the issues raised at the engagement session. This plan actually provides an environmental justice and equity analysis and stresses environmental justice and stresses equity in developing climate action strategies. It charts specific pathways of adaptation to lessen the increase of climate impacts of increased heat and flooding on vulnerable populations, and really identifies ways to ensure equity in developing these strategies. The plan also serves critically, because we're thinking about educating communities, it serves as a reference guide on climate change and outlines the history of state-level climate policies and practices. Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan 2021 is a blueprint for climate action, which embeds environmental justice and equity, and that is critical. We pledge, and this is the collective we on the call, and we collectively pledge to work collaboratively with communities to ensure they're able to use this plan as a tool for their already amazing existing work and to help drive future efforts to increase climate change awareness and education as a foundation for creating equitable climate initiatives at the local level. Equitable initiatives are key. We invite others from other sectors like the nonprofit, legislative, government, business, labor, and academic sectors, and other constituencies to join us as we take action on climate change. Thank you, and I'll turn it over now to Transportation Secretary Graham Mann.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here today and joining this very important conversation about climate change. Only a few weeks ago, the remnants of Hurricane Ida dumped rain on Pennsylvania for nearly 24 hours, as well as high winds and even tornadoes. Ida resulted in major flooding in many areas, especially in the southeast and south central areas of the state. Heavy rains and extreme weather wreaks havoc on our transportation infrastructure. Over 400 roads were closed at the height of Ida's impacts, including 16 major interstates or expressways. One particularly dramatic example is the Vine Street Expressway in Philadelphia, which flooded with nearly 30 million gallons of water, filling entire roadway and rising up the underdecks of the cross bridges as if a river was flowing through the city. It remained closed for several days as multiple agencies worked to remove the water, cleaned up the debris, and checked for damages. Over 800 bridges around the state will need post-flood inspections after Ida. We anticipate over $16 million in damage from Hurricane Ida and over 1,200 damaged locations. In 2018, which was the wettest year on record for many parts of Pennsylvania, there was nearly $126 million in flood and slide-related damage to state-maintained roads and bridges, not to mention the financial impacts to the local networks. This is roughly equal to the cost to resurface 125 miles of two-lane interstate and the highest cost in any single year in the past 10 years. Emergencies like these impact budgets, planned projects, and workforce priorities. These are the real-world impacts of a changing climate. Flooding is happening more often and in areas where it may not have in the past. Pennsylvania has seen a 10% increase in precipitation over the last 50 years, and we anticipate by 2050, precipitation will be 8% higher than it is now. In 2018, PennDOT finalized an extreme weather vulnerability study, which analyzed past PennDOT flooding-related data, traffic volumes, federal and national weather and flooding resources, and identified roadways susceptible to flooding based on that data. We incorporated the data in the study into our maintenance and planning practices, and we designed projects with longer-term resiliency in mind. Because we know that we are already experiencing the effects of climate change, we need to proactively work to adapt to this new reality. Additionally, transportation is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Pennsylvania. And while increased fuel efficiency and electrical vehicles becoming more mainstream for personal use have helped transportation emissions to decrease over time, the number of trips in Pennsylvania has increased and are projected to continue in this direction. Reducing the number of individual vehicle trips will help, but while public transportation is available in some form in all 67 Pennsylvania counties, in many areas of the state, it's difficult to get around without access to a vehicle. And Pennsylvanians who are part of a minority group are disproportionately impacted by this. 34% of Black, 22% of Latino, 23% of Native Americans, 14% of Asian Pacific Islanders households in Pennsylvania do not have access to a vehicle as compared to 8% of white Pennsylvania households. Investing in a robust and reliable public transportation system will increase mobility for all Pennsylvanians, as well as addressing traffic congestion. Creating and supporting a safe, sustainable, quality transportation system that works for everyone is at the center of PennDOT's mission, and we are committed to the ongoing work that this requires. Now I'm happy to turn things over to the Secretary of Agriculture, Russell Redding.
Secretary Gremian, thank you. It's good to be with you and my colleagues, and a special note of thanks to Secretary McDonald and team for spearheading this report, the assessment that was done previously, and the report that we now have in front of us. Thank you to you and your team. Very much appreciated. As we know, and as we've heard here again today, that climate change is not exclusive. It does not pick and choose who it affects, right? It affects every one of us and underscores the interagency collaboration that you see here today and the report captures. It also means that we collectively then can be part of that solution. Pennsylvania agriculture has a very intimate relationship with climate, right? We live and die by the climate. We have seen the extremes of weather in the last several years. Secretary Gramian's point earlier about just recently the impact of heavy rains and flooding. We've seen those certainly on the fields of Pennsylvania and across our farm country. But again, it is not limited to our rural areas and farms. Everyone in Pennsylvania is impacted. And the other extreme, of course, we have had those. I mean, the droughts, that plague our cities and test our production systems and our water reserves is another result of extreme climate. But one of the concerns to agriculture is what happens to risk, right? It magnifies the risk. And that risk comes in many forms. Secretary Dunn and I had the pleasure several weeks ago to join the Center for Rural Pennsylvania to talk about invasive species. And what is happening across the state of Pennsylvania, again, is in part attributable to the climate and the climate changes, because as climate increases, the invasive species introduced to this region and this pathway into Pennsylvania in the Northeast is further extended because of climate. The other risk, and it's important, is that the 60% of the human diseases and 75% of the emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. Right? I mean, they go back and forth, or can go back and forth, between humans and animals. That's simply the diseases in invasive species. In addition to that, of course, our livestock. We are a livestock-dependent state, and our companion animals, which we know are even more important to us now in a post-pandemic than they were. But the heat stress experienced by animals can lead to extended health issues, of course, and in the case of dairy, we know decreased yields and production. But we can reach this conclusion that this is impossible. This is overwhelming and daunting. I would argue that, to the contrary, is that we collectively actually can do a lot of things. And the action plan captures that. So I'm optimistic about the plan, what it provides. It is a guide, a blueprint, the words you've heard today. It's a comprehensive plan that collectively allows us to mitigate climate change. For agriculture specifically, it notes two important actions. One is to use all of the existing tools and programs and incentives to increase the energy efficiency for agriculture. And secondly, provide trainings and tools to help farmers implement the agricultural best practices, as we call them. Now, these are best practices that are part of what we do. They're farmland preservation, it's soil health, it's nutrient management, forest stewardship, things that Secretary McDonald and Dunn and I spent a lot of time talking about relative to water quality. They are directly transferable to the challenge of climate, right? So it is a two-for where we get the water quality benefits, but we also get the benefit of carbon sequestration and management. That is important. Our Bureau of Farmland Preservation in Pennsylvania leads the nation. We just celebrated 600,000 acres being preserved in Pennsylvania several weeks ago. In addition to that, we have our Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The governor and the General Assembly put Pennsylvania in a great position to do something that not another state in this nation has done, and that's a state-level farm bill. It provides new resources for planning and engagement and best management practices. And we have a state conservation commission in Pennsylvania that Secretary McDonald and I have the privilege of sharing. But the work that they do, the relationships they have at conservation districts with the farm community, and many of the stakeholders that the Secretary noted are really important in the effort of mitigation. The Conservation Commission also has some of the resources to the goals and the action items, working with our REAP tax credit program, which has been highly successful in Pennsylvania. All of these are best management practices as well. And then final point, that is fine. But one of the things that we know we have to do is to keep building our reservoir of resources, right? So the governor joined with other governors in the Chesapeake Bay region, and I've joined with my colleagues and other secretaries of agriculture to request the USDA to support the Chesapeake Bay Resilient Farms Initiative. It is about the tools and the resources we need to address the issues of both water quality and, of course, climate, and speak directly to the action plan. We feel the pressures of climate and the changes that are occurring. We feel the pressures of the environment and environmental stewardship. We feel the pressures of water quality. All of that comes together in this discussion of climate and is exacerbated by the extremes. So thank you for being part of this conversation, to my colleagues, for your leadership, but also to all of Pennsylvania. We have an opportunity to change the course of climate, and we can do that with the tools that we have and the partnership that we have. So thank you. Always a pleasure to be with Secretary Don, my colleague at DCNR. Secretary, to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's wonderful to hear the comments from my colleagues and to talk about this important subject and think about the action element of this climate action plan and what it means and the multiple benefits of acting now. In DCNR's world, I'll talk about a few specific things. One is the impact on the forest and forest ecosystem. Think about the name Pennsylvania. It means Penn's woods. Forests are our primary ecosystem. We depend on them for our economy. The forest products industry, the recreation, the numerous benefits that come from forests. Forests are stressed by climate change. We're seeing shifts in the range of the species in Pennsylvania, and perhaps of specific concern, our state tree, the northern hemlock, is threatened by climate change in a couple ways. Number one, its range. Number two, as Secretary Redding mentioned, invasive species benefit from climate change, and the hemlock woolly adelgid is attacking our hemlocks. And to save hemlocks in many of our key areas, we've got to actually protect them with a pesticide. And when you have hemlocks in our forested streams, in our mountain streams of Pennsylvania, you have native brook trout. And when you lose hemlocks, and you lose that cooling shade from the hemlock trees, you put at risk the trout in that specific watershed. So there's two of our state species. A third one that's threatened by climate change, the eastern hellbender, was recently named a state amphibian, is a very specific, it has very specific habitat requirements. And so when you look at species that do okay with climate change versus species that do not, species that have very narrow ranges and specific requirements for food and cover don't do well with climate change. So as you look at a changing climate in Pennsylvania, we'll see a lot of shifts. Some species will do okay, and some will not, and everything will shift northward and upward in elevation. That leads to some of the solution-oriented elements, like all the speakers have said. Secretary Redding, McDonald, Secretary Gramian, and Allison Acevedo. Resolving this now has multiple benefits. When you think about weather-related impacts on humans, the thing that causes more fatalities than any other weather-related disaster is summer heat. Everyone thinks it's going to be tornadoes and hurricanes and something dramatic like earthquakes. It's actually summertime heat, and it's often in our heat island areas in the urban communities. And the solution there, one of the major solutions there, is regreening these areas. If you can just get 40% shade on those streets and sidewalks from street trees, that will make a huge difference in the local heat. If you get urban parks and shady, cool parks and those heat islands, that'll cool down the street temperatures. I think Allison Acevedo mentioned as much as 20 degrees. I've even heard 22 degrees from a study in Philadelphia. So that's the good news is there are some solutions at our fingertips that we can act on right now. The good news also is these solutions can be funded by RGGI. So while reducing carbon through RGGI, you can actually fuel the solutions on the solution side. As Secretary Redding mentioned, the work that Patrick, he and I do together in Chesapeake Bay, putting putting trees by our stream sides not only cools the stream, but it reduces the pollutants that are flowing into our streams and rivers in Chesapeake Bay. Again, multiple benefits, cleans up our water. We all need water, cools down the streams, helps our habitats in the streams, and meets our Chesapeake Bay requirements. So again, multiple benefits for acting now. Just switching to recreation briefly, impacts on recreation. First of all, flooding and drought has a major impact on water-based recreation. You can't paddle and swim in a stream that's flooding, nor can you when there's a trickle of water because of a drought. The damage done by storm events, as Secretary Gramian mentioned, Hurricane Ida and its dramatic effect in the southeast. We're tallying up the cost, but Hurricane Ida really did damage to 60 miles of the Delaware Canal State Park. Beautiful Delaware Riverside State Park damaged greatly by Hurricane Ida. Damages might be up in the $20 million range to that park. Again, these are important recreation areas for both water and land-based recreation damaged by a hurricane. This summer, we had a tornado spawned by a rapidly moving weather system hit Laurel Hill State Park. We've seen more and more of these. There were 1,200 people as overnight guests in that park when the tornado hit the park. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but it destroyed buildings and tore down trees and did a lot of damage to the park. In DCNR, with 121 state parks, we hosted 46 million visits last year. A lot of people recreating outdoors. And when extreme weather hits, they may be in a tent or they may be out in the woods. They may not have the protection that they would have at home. So again, safety, human safety, and also damage to the public infrastructure is a big challenge. So again, like others have said, the goal is to act now. This is a climate action plan. It incorporates a comprehensive list of ideas and opportunities. We try to demonstrate some of these ideas at the state parks. Just early this week, I announced as part of a sustainability tour that we'll be putting Presque Isle State Park to net zero. We're putting a solar parking canopy at Beach 8. That'll shade the cars, make it nice for the visitors, and bring the whole park to net zero. We already have a small solar array at the Tom Ridge Center that brings the education wing down to net zero. So again, improving the park, improving the experience, reducing the carbon, it's all mutual benefits. We have electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations, LEED certified buildings, and we put them out there on the public lands for demonstration purposes and to reduce our carbon impact, but also hoping that when entities, whether they're businesses, whether they're civic organizations or individuals, are considering what action you can take, that you can come and see some of these opportunities and perhaps use them as your climate action. So with that, I will turn it back to Deb Platani to field questions from the media.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Dunn. Yes, now we'll open it up to questions from reporters. Please use the hand-raising function at the bottom. Provide your name and the name of your outlet, and then ask your questions. We'll try our best to answer questions in order. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. I think you were muted for a second. I'm not sure how I did that. Rachel McDevitt at State Impact Pennsylvania. I was curious if perhaps Patrick McDonnell or Secretary McDonnell could just outline what is most significantly different in this updated climate action plan from the last version.
Sure. So I think that there's a couple things. One, we have a little better information that we're building upon in terms of the impact assessment that was released earlier. So a little finer point on that. I think there's a greater emphasis this time on items like the carbon sequestration, methane capture piece. One of the interesting things, and this is in talking with some of my other colleagues in other states, is in a lot of cases, they have one area that is overwhelmingly the biggest driver of greenhouse gas sources for them. For us, when you look at the three big ones, electric generation, transportation, and industrial, they're actually very, very close in terms of that overall percentage. So, making sure that we have an emphasis on all of those areas, electric generation, transportation, and industrial is critical.
Okay, and now we will take a question from Frank Coomer at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Let me, Frank, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the summary, anyway, reports that the statewide average temperature has risen 2 degrees since 1900. Then it says in a bolded point that it'd be an average of 5.9 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. Can you say what the base year of that is? 5.9 degrees from now? Or is that 5.9 degrees from 1900?
It's an additional 5.9 degrees.
From 2021?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank
you. I'm trying to remember the base year if it's 2020. We can get you that specific answer, what that year was, but I believe it might be 2020 as the base year for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question from Paul Go at the Pittsburgh Business Times.
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's Paul Go from the Pittsburgh Business Times. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you, Secretary. You mentioned that the climate plan envisions the transition of power generation to renewable and nuclear, and I'm looking at some of that data right now. I mean, what would that look like? Coal is obviously declining. Gas, though, is in a, they're seeing higher prices. The production is, if not increasing, it's stable. How would that and what would that pathway look like, and what kind of time frame are you looking at, and how are you going to make that happen?
Sure. So as I said before, for some of this, we're looking at 5 years. For some, it's 10 years and beyond. Obviously, in implementing something like Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, it's something that starts to move us toward less fossil fuels, but it's incremental. It moves it in an incremental path. Similarly, if we did the Advanced Energy Portfolio Standard, that would move us in an incremental path. So I don't think any of this is flipping a switch that would turn things off tomorrow, next year, or this decade. But it's how do we put ourselves not just on a path to reduce fossil fuels, but also, frankly, take advantage of the economic opportunity that we see in the renewable and clean energy space, energy efficiency, wind and solar jobs, wind and solar being two of the fastest growing jobs that we see in the Commonwealth.
Okay, next question from Yanni Pashakis at the Central Penn Business Journal.
Hello, everyone. How crucial is RGGI to this plan? How much do these actions rely on that RGGI money?
So obviously, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative revenue is an important factor, both in terms of the ability to reduce, but also the revenue it can provide to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants. That said, it's not that revenue isn't the thing we relied on in this modeling or putting together the actions. There's other things within this, building electrification, building code changes, the alternative energy portfolio standard I mentioned earlier, the low carbon fuel standard as part of the plan that aren't about the revenue but are about policy choices in order to drive down emissions. So RGGI's certainly a large portion of it, but it's not the only thing. One of the things we say in this space is it's not a matter of one thing, five things. It's hundreds of actions and decisions, thousands of actions and decisions we're going to have to take.
Okay, next question is from Joel Berg.
Hi, thanks. The question I have is, I'm looking at the report on Roman numeral page 18, and I'm trying to understand why the business as usual case shows pretty much a stop in the decline in emissions. So if you look at us from 2005 to the 2017, we're on this downward slope, right? And then if you continue that slope, we pretty much reach our target in 2050, but we have this business as usual baseline that doesn't get us there. In some ways, it shows us panning out and going back up in the 2040s. So I'm curious, what goes into that business as usual case that makes you think we're not going to continue on the current trend downward, but are somehow going to stop and reverse course?
Sure, thank you. And it's really a couple things. One is on the electricity side, a lot of that reduction was driven by a changeover from coal to natural gas. There's only so much of that replacement, however, that you get. It's not a replacement that continues to happen. The other is within the vehicle sector that continuing to see, as Secretary Gramian said, additional vehicle miles being traveled and potentially even some increases in that sector. We're certainly seeing some changeover on the passenger vehicle side to electric vehicles, but it's not happening quickly. I think we're at about 30,000 registered vehicles of well over 4 million vehicles within the Commonwealth, and none of that even speaks to the medium and heavy duty vehicle sector, which we're still kind of in the early stages of seeing change there. So it really is about
the recording has stopped.
It really is about the changes that we've already seen and those not being able to be replicated, as well as trends we're seeing in other sectors.
Okay, couple other questions here. Question from Laura Legier from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Thank you. Two members of the Climate Change Advisory Committee who both work for fossil fuel firms referred to a fatal flaw in the plan, which is that it doesn't account for how some of these changes would affect surrounding states, and it doesn't detail exactly how much, for example, cooler Pennsylvania would get from initiating these actions, essentially arguing that absent collective action and everyone else doing their part, this is a futile activity. I'm just curious about your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, my response on that is relatively simple, and that is, we as a state are in the top 5 largest greenhouse gas emitters in the country. And while it's certainly true, Pennsylvania will not solve the climate change crisis on its own, the rest of the world will not solve it without us. And so we need to be active. We need to be demonstrating leadership in this area. And in the same way that we drove a lot of industrial and energy production in our past, we can drive renewable energy production and manufacturing going forward. So, the rest of the world cannot do this without the Commonwealth.
Patrick, if I add on to that, the carbon capture and storage work that DCNR is doing through our geologic survey is done in conjunction with other states. Each of the basin studies on the potential for carbon capture and storage involves, in many cases, other Appalachian Basin states that are energy producers, and so that's very much a collaborative effort. And I do think and Patrick and Russell and I are in Chesapeake Bay meetings. Clyde is part of the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, part of the Great Lakes Initiative, part of the Delaware Initiative. Every surrounding state is involved in some manner. This is an issue where everybody's got to step up and do what it is in their jurisdiction that they can do. And, the Fortune 500 companies, you get on a webpage for any Fortune 500 company. My county, Cumberland County, just announced its climate plan. I mean, everyone's stepping up, and we got to do what's within our collective and individual abilities to move the needle.
Okay, we have a question from Pat Clunan from the Indiana Gazette. Will there be specifics for areas of the state, specific areas of the state that are reportedly of special interest, as I've been told Indiana County is?
Sure. So I think two things. Some of this relates to Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and then some of it relates to Climate Action Plan more broadly. I'd say, as we look at the RGGI revenues, certainly that is something that we've committed to spend a fair bit of those dollars in accordance with a lot of what's going on at federal level. With the Environmental Justice 40 initiative, spending those dollars in environmental justice communities across the state. That isn't to say you need to be in an environmental justice community to have the benefit, but there's certainly a thumb on the scale for a good portion of those dollars. The other thing I'd say is, we as we look at the modeling on this, we have the impacts that we're going to see across the Commonwealth in terms of things we're already needing to start adapting to and paying for. And those in particular hit those communities. So making sure that we're spending dollars in those communities to encourage their resilience is also critical.
Okay, and it looks like we have one last question, again from Rachel McDevitt at WITF, State Impact. Rachel, that'll wrap it up for today. I'm lowering your hand. Does that unmute you?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Just with the Climate Action Plan, how much of it would be dependent, if we were to do every item on it, how much is dependent on action from the legislature, and how much is within the control of the executive branch and is already underway?
I don't have the tally, but just as an example, again, things like Advanced Energy Portfolio Standard is something that would require legislative action. Obviously, we're already pursuing Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. There's certainly things that we can do, through some of the existing processes on codes and things like that. There's a lot of this that obviously would help to have legislation really driving and making sure that precise answer in terms of a percentage of actions or a percentage kind of subhead under those actions. But there's some of this that is executive, and then some of this that is would have some legislative requirements to it.
Okay, that wraps up our questions. Thank you very much to our speakers, to media participants, and to those of you watching online. That concludes today's announcement.
Thank you all.
Thank you.